Anniversaries were supposed to be a celebration of love, a reminder of the vows we took, the promises we made. For the past 10 years, I had cherished this day, planning elaborate surprises to make my wife, Lauren, feel special. I thought we were happy, or at least, I wanted to believe that. This year, however, something felt off. Lauren had always been excited about our anniversaries. She would spend weeks dropping hints about what she wanted, sending me links to fancy restaurants, suggesting weekend getaways. But this time, there was none of that. When I brought it up a month ago, she simply smiled and said, "Oh, let's keep it simple this year, babe. Maybe a quiet dinner at home." That should have been my first clue. Lauren wasn't the type to keep it simple. She thrived on attention, on grand gestures. She lived for the spectacle. The idea that she would suddenly want a quiet night in didn't sit right with me. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe she was just tired of the routine. Maybe she truly wanted a low-key evening for once. But the signs were there, the small, almost imperceptible shifts in her behavior. The way she started staying late at work more often, claiming deadlines were piling up. The way she seemed more glued to her phone than usual, always angling the screen away from me. The way she would get lost in thought, only to snap back to reality when she noticed me watching her. The final straw came 2 weeks before our anniversary. I was up late working in my home office when I heard Lauren's hushed voice from the bedroom. She rarely talked on the phone at night, especially not in that soft, almost intimate tone. I stood silently by the door, straining to hear. "I can't wait. No, he has no idea. It's all going perfectly." My stomach clenched. There was no mistaking that kind of conversation. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I started watching her closely. And what I found sent a chill through me. Lauren's work schedule hadn't changed, but her routine had. On the nights she was supposedly working late, she wasn't at the office. I tracked her phone once, just once, and what I saw confirmed my worst fear. She was at the Belmont Hotel. The pieces started clicking into place. I spent the next week playing the part of the oblivious husband, smiling when she smiled, kissing her goodbye when she left for work, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was seething. Our 10th anniversary was approaching, and while I had planned to surprise her with a diamond necklace, she had planned to surprise me with betrayal. But she didn't know that I knew. And that's what gave me the advantage. I needed proof. Real proof. Not just location tracking and suspicious glances. I needed something undeniable. That's when I hired Chris Malone, a private investigator recommended by a friend. Chris had handled cases like this before, and within days he had gathered more than enough evidence. Photos. Videos. Receipts. Lauren wasn't just cheating on me, she was planning something big for our anniversary. I stared at the images Chris had sent me, my hands tightening into fists. There she was, wrapped around a man I had never seen before. A tall, dark-haired stranger who looked a few years younger than me. They weren't just meeting up for secret rendezvous, this was something more. "They're planning something for Friday night," Chris told me over the phone. I overheard her telling him that it'll be the perfect night to finally be together without any complications. Complications. That's what she called me. Lauren's perfect plan was to use our anniversary as a distraction. She thought I would be home, waiting like a fool while she celebrated our 10 years together by sleeping with someone else. Except she had no idea that I had a plan of my own. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to let her dig her own grave. And then I was going to watch her reaction when she realized the truth. The days leading up to our anniversary felt like an act in a play, one where I knew the script but pretended not to. I watched Lauren move through our house with that same ease she always had, her laugh as light and convincing as ever. But now, every smile she gave me felt like a dagger, every casual touch a rehearsed lie. She thought she was in control. That was her first mistake. I spent that week perfecting my role. The clueless husband. The loving fool. I even surprised her with little things, a bouquet of her favorite lilies, take out from the restaurant where we had our first date. She acted touched, her eyes softening in ways that almost made me doubt what I knew. Almost. But then she'd get that distant look again when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Checking her phone a little too often. Smiling at texts she claimed were from work. The night before our anniversary, I found her packing a small overnight bag. She didn't even try to hide it. "What's that for?" I asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, it's nothing. Just some stuff for tomorrow. I thought maybe we could spend the night at that cabin you love upstate." A surprise. A surprise, indeed. I smiled like an idiot, pretending to be touched. That sounds amazing. But in that moment, I knew exactly what she was doing. She was setting the stage, crafting an alibi. She had no intention of going to the cabin with me. It was a cover for wherever she really planned to be, with him. I waited until she fell asleep that night, her soft breathing a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside me. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how many nights I had laid beside her, oblivious to the betrayal growing between us. But not anymore. Now it was my turn. The next day, our anniversary, I played the part perfectly. I woke up early and made her breakfast, pancakes, her favorite, with fresh berries and coffee just the way she liked it. "Wow, you're spoiling me," she said with a laugh, wrapping her arms around my neck. I forced a smile. "You deserve it." She kissed me then. Soft, sweet. But all I could think about was how easily that mouth had lied to me. We spent the morning like any other couple would on their anniversary. A walk in the park. Lunch at a cozy cafe. To anyone watching, we were the picture of happiness. But under the surface, everything was different. By late afternoon, Lauren's fake enthusiasm started to wane. She kept checking the time, glancing at her phone, texting someone she claimed was her friend Jenna. I knew better. "Hey babe," she said around 4 p.m., her tone overly casual. "I just remembered. I promised Jenna I'd help her with something really quick. It's her birthday next week, and she's stressing about the decorations. Do you mind if I pop over for an hour?" There it was. The moment she'd been waiting for. I didn't flinch. "Of course, go ahead. I'll start getting things ready for tonight." She kissed my cheek, grabbed her bag, and left with a smile. I watched from the window as she drove away, her car disappearing down the street. But she wasn't going to Jenna's. And she wasn't going alone. As soon as she was gone, I sprang into action. I called Chris, the private investigator, who was already stationed a few blocks away. "She just left," I said. "You know what to do." "Got it," he replied, his voice steady. "I'll keep you posted." While Chris followed Lauren, I put the second part of my plan into motion. I grabbed the small black bag I'd hidden in the closet, a bag filled with everything I needed for tonight. Evidence. Photos. Messages. Receipts. Proof of her betrayal, neatly packaged and ready to be unwrapped. But the real surprise wasn't for Lauren. It was for him. I wasn't going to confront her in private. No, that would have been too easy. She would have cried, made excuses, spun more lies. Instead, I wanted them both to feel exposed. Vulnerable. So I made one more call, to his wife. "Hello?" Her voice was hesitant, unfamiliar. "Hi, is this Rachel?" I asked. "Yes, who is this?" I took a deep breath. "You don't know me, but we need to meet. It's about your husband." There was a pause on the line, a flicker of suspicion in her voice. "Who are you?" "I'm the man he's been sleeping around on me with." Silence. Then a shaky breath. "Where do you want to meet?" I gave her the address. The same hotel where Lauren thought she'd be spending a secret, romantic evening. But when she walked through that door, she'd find more than just her lover waiting. She'd find me. And Rachel. Armed with the truth. The hotel wasn't anything special, just a modest, business-class place tucked into a quiet corner of the city. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. I arrived early, my heart pounding with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I wasn't sure if it was the betrayal itself that burned the most or the fact that Lauren thought I was too blind, too trusting to ever catch on. But here I was, waiting. The hotel lobby was dimly lit, the faint hum of generic jazz spilling from hidden speakers. A few guests passed through, businessmen, a couple of tourists dragging suitcases, but none of them mattered. The only two people I cared about were on their way. Chris had been texting me updates all afternoon. She's with him. They just pulled into the parking garage. They're heading upstairs now. Room 514. I could feel the rage simmering beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. But I wasn't here to explode. This wasn't about screaming or throwing punches. That's what they would expect. That's what would give them power. No. I wanted to watch them squirm under the weight of their own lies. 10 minutes later, Rachel arrived. She was striking, tall, sharp features, with dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. She wore simple jeans and a blazer, but her expression carried the weight of someone who had been betrayed before. Our eyes met, and for a brief second, there was an unspoken understanding between us. We were both here for the same reason. "You're James?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "Yeah." I nodded, extending a hand. It felt strange, formal, almost businesslike. But this wasn't a casual meeting. This was war. Rachel didn't waste time. "What room?" 514. She nodded sharply. "Let's go." As we rode the elevator in silence, I couldn't help but glance at her reflection in the mirrored walls. She looked composed, but her clenched jaw and white-knuckled grip on her phone told a different story. When the doors slid open on the 5th floor, my heart raced so hard I thought it might drown out the soft hum of the hallway lights. We stopped outside room 514. Rachel turned to me, her face unreadable. "Are you ready?" "More than ever," I whispered. She didn't knock. She just opened the door. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the bedside lamps. It smelled faintly of cheap perfume and something else, something that made my stomach twist. There they were. Lauren and him. Caught in the middle of their betrayal. Lauren was perched on the edge of the bed, her hair tousled, laughter frozen on her lips as she looked up, and saw us standing there. Her face drained of color in an instant. The man, her man, scrambled to his feet, his expression flickering from confusion to panic. He was exactly how I imagined him, smug, arrogant, the kind of guy who thought he could take whatever he wanted without consequence. "Not today." "James?" Lauren's voice cracked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" I stepped into the room, my heart pounding but my voice calm. "Happy anniversary, Lauren." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel moved past me, her eyes locked on the man who had ruined both our lives. "Hello, Mark," she said coldly. "Surprised to see me?" Mark, because of course his name was Mark, stammered, trying to find words. But there was nothing he could say. I pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying. Inside were the photos Chris had taken. The text messages. The receipts. Proof of everything. I tossed it onto the bed. "I thought we could go through some memories together." Lauren didn't even reach for it. She just sat there, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Mark finally found his voice. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed, actually laughed. The sound felt foreign coming out of my mouth. "Really? Because it looks exactly like what it is." Rachel crossed her arms, her face a mask of icy rage. "You're pathetic, Mark. All those lies, all those business trips, and this is what it comes down to. A cheap hotel room?" Lauren finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "James, I can explain." "Explain?" I cut her off, stepping closer. "Explain what, exactly? That you've been sneaking around for months? That you thought I was too stupid to notice?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because there was nothing left to say. I wasn't here for explanations. I was here to watch her realize that the life she thought she controlled was slipping through her fingers. You planned this, Lauren whispered, her eyes narrowing slightly. There was fear there, but something else, too. Realization. You're damn right I did. I turned to leave, my part done. But Rachel wasn't finished. She walked right up to Mark, her voice low and venomous. I hope she was worth it. Because you've just lost everything. And with that, we left them there, trapped in the mess they'd created, forced to face each other without the lies to shield them. As we rode the elevator back down, Rachel finally let out a shaky breath. Well, she said softly, that went about as expected. I nodded, staring at the reflection of a man I barely recognized anymore. But for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something new. Not anger. Not betrayal. Freedom. Walking out of that hotel felt like shedding a skin I'd been trapped in for years. The cool night air hit me like a slap, sharp and refreshing, cutting through the thick fog of betrayal that had clouded my mind. The confrontation was over, but the echoes of it lingered, replaying in my head like a broken record. Lauren's pale face, Mark's stammering excuses, Rachel's icy calm. Rachel and I parted ways in the parking lot with nothing more than a nod, two strangers bound together by shared betrayal. There was nothing left to say. We both knew that this was just the beginning of the real battle, the aftermath. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, staring blankly at the steering wheel. My wedding ring felt like a weight on my finger, a symbol of vows that meant nothing now. Without thinking, I slid it off and tossed it into the glove compartment. I drove aimlessly through the city, letting the rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement drown out the noise in my head. I didn't want to go home, not to the house we'd built together, filled with memories that now felt like lies carved into the walls. Eventually, I found myself parked outside an old diner, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I slid into a booth, ordered a black coffee, and stared out the window at nothing. That's when my phone buzzed. Lauren. I let it ring. And ring. And ring. Eventually, the buzzing stopped, only to be replaced by a flood of messages. James, please answer. We need to talk. I can explain. I'm sorry. Sorry. The word felt hollow, meaningless. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. When I finally walked through the door of our house the next morning, it was like stepping into a crime scene. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different. The same photos hung on the walls, but now they mocked me, smiling faces frozen in moments that felt like a lie. Lauren was there, sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy. She shot up as soon as she saw me, rushing over like nothing had happened. James, please, just let me explain. I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't, I said quietly. I don't want to hear it. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel anything. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. It was a mistake, she whispered, tears spilling down her face. I didn't mean for it to happen. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You didn't mean for it to happen? You planned it, Lauren. On our anniversary. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Good. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice cold and sharp. Throwing away everything for what? Some cheap thrill? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was louder than any excuse she could have given. I walked past her, straight to our bedroom, and pulled out a suitcase. I packed without thinking, just the essentials. She stood in the doorway, watching, her face crumpled with regret. Where are you going? She finally choked out. Anywhere but here, I replied, zipping up the bag. I stayed at a hotel for a few days, needing space to think. But the silence was suffocating, and the memories crept in like shadows under the door. I couldn't escape them. That's when I decided I wasn't going to be a victim in this story. I met with a divorce lawyer the following week. Her name was Sandra Cole, sharp, no nonsense, exactly what I needed. I laid everything out, every detail, every piece of evidence. She listened without interrupting, her pen scribbling notes at lightning speed. When I finished, she looked up, her eyes cool and calculating. "You've got a strong case," she said simply. "We'll make sure she doesn't walk away from this with anything she doesn't deserve." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to relief. Lauren tried to reach out countless times, calls, texts, even emails filled with empty apologies and promises to make things right. But there was no going back. The house went up for sale. Our joint accounts were frozen. The life we'd built together was dismantled piece by piece, and with each piece that fell away, I felt lighter. One evening, as I was packing up the last of my things from the house, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." No name. No context. But I knew exactly who it was from. Mark. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I smiled. Because he was wrong. It was over. The message from Mark sat on my phone like a landmine, small but filled with the potential to explode. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Pathetic. That was my first thought. The words reeked of desperation, the fragile ego of a man who thought he could steal another man's life and walk away unscathed. But what did he mean? "This isn't over." Was it a threat? A warning? Or just the empty words of someone grappling with the fact that his perfect little affair had crumbled into dust? I didn't respond. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I screenshotted the message, saved it, and moved on. At least, that's what I told myself. But the truth was, the words haunted me more than I cared to admit. Days turned into weeks, and life moved forward, or at least pretended to. The divorce was in motion, the paperwork filed, assets being divided. I'd moved into a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it was mine. No echoes of betrayal in the walls, no reminders lurking in the corners. Lauren tried to reach out a few more times. Emails filled with nostalgia, voicemails thick with tears. "James, please. I miss you. I was stupid. It didn't mean anything." I deleted them all without listening past the first few words. But Mark's message stayed with me. Then, one day, I got another. "Hope you're enjoying your new life. Don't get too comfortable." This time, I felt a flicker of something. Not fear. Not exactly. More like curiosity mixed with irritation. What was he playing at? I decided to find out. I called Chris, the private investigator, and filled him in. "You think he's serious?" I asked. Chris chuckled darkly. "Guys like him? It's all about control. He lost it when you confronted him, and now he's grasping at whatever scraps are left." "So what do I do?" "Nothing," Chris replied. "Let me handle it." Within a few days, Chris had dug up more on Mark than I expected: financial records, employment history, even details about his crumbling marriage. Apparently, Rachel hadn't just kicked him out, she'd launched a legal assault that made my divorce look like a friendly handshake. He'd lost his job, his apartment, and judging by the latest court filings, his dignity wasn't far behind. Good. But then Chris dropped the real bomb. "You're not going to believe this," he said, sending me a file. I opened it, and my stomach twisted into knots. Photos. Of Lauren. With Mark. Again. After everything. After the hotel confrontation, the fallout, the tears, she'd gone back to him. It wasn't even subtle. Dinner dates. Holding hands in public. Like they weren't the reason 2 marriages had collapsed. Like none of it mattered. But this time, it didn't hurt. This time, it lit a fire. I wasn't going to let them ride off into the sunset, pretending they hadn't left destruction in their wake. They wanted to play games? Fine. I'd win. I met with Sandra, my lawyer, and laid everything out: the messages, the photos, the details Chris had uncovered. "Let's bury them," I said simply. And she did. Legal filings that dragged Mark into court for harassment. Evidence that painted Lauren as not just unfaithful, but manipulative and reckless, a strategy that helped me secure favorable terms in the divorce. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the message. I wasn't the victim. I was the reckoning, Months later, after the dust had settled, I ran into them by chance. A coffee shop, of all places. Lauren looked older somehow, the weight of her choices etched into the lines around her eyes. Mark stood beside her, trying to appear confident, but his posture betrayed him, a man worn thin by his own mistakes. Our eyes met. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I smiled. Not out of kindness, but because I'd won. Without lifting a finger, I'd watched them destroy each other. And I was free. After that chance encounter at the coffee shop, something shifted in me. Seeing Lauren and Mark standing there, shadows of the people they pretended to be, should have stirred rage, resentment, maybe even sadness. But all I felt was indifference. The weight they had placed on my chest for months had vanished, like it had never been there. I thought that would be the end of it. But ghosts have a way of following you, even when you think you've outrun them. The apartment I'd moved into had become more than just a place to sleep. It was my refuge, the clean slate I'd convinced myself I needed. Sparse furniture, no pictures on the walls, nothing that could tether me to a past I was trying to forget. I was settling into a new routine. Work had become my anchor, something predictable in the chaos. Even casual conversations with friends started feeling normal again, like I wasn't constantly carrying this invisible wound beneath my skin. But just when you think life is smoothing out, it has a way of reminding you that the storm isn't done yet. It started with little things. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision when I was sure I was alone. Paranoia, I told myself. The mind playing tricks. Until it wasn't point one evening, I came home late after a long day at the office. The hallway to my apartment was dim, the flickering overhead light casting eerie shadows against the walls. I fumbled with my keys, the exhaustion pressing down on me like a weight. But when I stepped inside, something felt wrong. Nothing was out of place. The door was locked, the windows shut. But there was this faint, lingering scent in the air, familiar and unwelcome. Lauren's perfume. Subtle, but unmistakable. I froze, scanning the small space. No signs of a break-in. No open windows. No notes left behind. But she'd been there. I was sure of it. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my car windshield. No return address. No name. Inside, a single photo. Me. Taken from a distance, blurry but clear enough to see it was recent. I was walking into my office building, unaware, oblivious. On the back of the photo, a simple message scrawled in red ink. You can't run from what's inside you. I stared at it for a long time, the chill creeping up my spine. Was it Lauren? Mark? Someone else entirely? I thought about calling Chris, the private investigator, but something stopped me. This felt personal, like they wanted me to react. To spiral. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I decided to confront it head-on. It didn't take long to find them. Mark's life had been unraveling faster than I'd imagined. Fired from his job, drowning in debt, clinging to Lauren like she was the last life raft on a sinking ship. I waited outside his rundown apartment complex, hidden in plain sight. When they finally emerged, arguing, as if that was all they knew how to do now, I stepped out of the shadows. Lauren's eyes met mine first. She stopped mid-sentence, her face a mask of shock and something else. Guilt? Fear? Mark turned, his expression shifting from surprise to smug defiance. Well, look who it is, he sneered, trying to puff himself up. Miss me? I didn't respond. I just held up the photo, the one from my car. His smirk faded. What's this? He asked, but his voice had lost its edge. You tell me, I replied, my tone flat. Lauren tried to speak, but I cut her off with a glance. You've been following me? I continued, stepping closer. Trying to scare me? Mark opened his mouth, probably to throw out some weak excuse, but I didn't wait for it. Here's the thing, I said quietly, leaning in just enough so only he could hear. You've already lost. You just don't know how to stop losing. I dropped the photo at his feet and walked away, not bothering to look back. Because it was over. Not with some dramatic showdown. Not with revenge or violence. But with the simple truth. They couldn't touch me anymore. A few days later, I received another envelope. No photo this time. Just a note. You think you're free. But you'll always carry us with you. And for the first time in months, I laughed. Because they were wrong. I wasn't carrying them anymore. They were the ones haunted by me. The note sat on my kitchen counter for days, untouched, its words etched into my mind like graffiti carved into glass. You think you're free. But you'll always carry us with you. I'd laughed when I first read it, dismissing it as another desperate attempt by Lauren, or Mark, to claw their way back into my life. But the laughter faded quickly, replaced by something colder, something quieter. Not fear. Not anger. Just curiosity. Because as much as I hated to admit it, they weren't entirely wrong. Maybe I wasn't carrying them like a burden anymore, but their fingerprints were still all over the life I was trying to rebuild. Every decision I made, every relationship I avoided, every time I double-checked a locked door, it was all because of them. And I hated that. So I decided to do what I should have done from the start. End it. For good doubt I reached out to Chris again, meeting him at a small cafe downtown. He looked the same, calm, collected, with that no-nonsense demeanor that made him good at his job. I thought you were done with this, he said as he slid into the booth across from me. So did I replied, handing him the note. He read it, his brow furrowing slightly. You think it's Mark? Could be. But something feels different this time. Chris nodded slowly, tucking the note into his jacket. I'll look into it. Simple. Efficient. No drama. But what he found over the next few days wasn't simple at all. Chris called me late one evening. His voice was different, tighter, sharper. We need to meet. Now. 15 minutes later, we were sitting in my apartment, the city lights casting long shadows across the room. Chris pulled out a folder and dropped it on the table. You're not going to like this. I opened it, expecting more photos of Mark and Lauren, maybe some new threats. But what I saw stopped me cold. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't Lauren. It was someone else entirely. A name I hadn't thought about in months. Rachel. Mark's ex-wife. The woman who had stood beside me in that hotel room, just as betrayed, just as broken. But in the photos Chris had taken, she didn't look broken anymore. She looked determined. Focused. Watching me, Chris leaned back, his expression unreadable. She's been following you for weeks. She's careful, but not careful enough. I stared at the images. Rachel sitting in her car outside my office. Rachel at the same grocery store I went to. Rachel in the background of a photo someone else had taken at the park. Why? I whispered, more to myself than to Chris. But I already knew the answer. It was never just about Mark and Lauren. It was about all of us, tangled in a web of betrayal and revenge, unable to break free because none of us really wanted to. We wanted control. Closure. And maybe, deep down, we wanted each other to hurt as much as we did. I didn't wait for Rachel to come to me again. I went to her. Found her at the same cafe where we met the first time, sitting alone, scrolling through her phone like she wasn't unraveling my life one thread at a time. I sat down across from her without a word. She looked up, her face calm, as if she'd been expecting me. James, she said with a small smile. Took you long enough. I didn't smile back. Why? She shrugged, stirring her coffee. Because you walked away like it was over. Like you could just move on. I felt my jaw tighten. It was over. Not for me. She snapped, her calm mask slipping for just a second. You think I could just forget? You think I could watch you walk away from everything while I was left with the wreckage? I leaned in, my voice low and steady. I didn't wreck your life, Rachel. Mark did. You want revenge? Go after him. Leave me out of it. She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Oh, I've already destroyed Mark. That part was easy. But you're different. You got to be the hero. The strong one. The guy who moved on. She leaned closer, her eyes dark and filled with something I couldn't quite name. I just wanted to remind you that you're not as free as you think you are. I stood up without another word, leaving her there with her cold coffee and colder heart. Driving home, I thought about her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe none of us ever really moved on. Maybe we just carried our ghosts differently. But here's the thing about ghosts. You can't haunt someone who refuses to be afraid. Driving home after confronting Rachel, my mind was a tangled mess of rage and disbelief. I kept replaying her words. I just wanted to remind you that you're not as free as you think you are. It wasn't just her smugness that rattled me. It was the truth buried beneath it. Because maybe I wasn't free. Not from Lauren. Not from Mark. Not from any of it. They had left scars I couldn't see, but I could feel them. Every time I looked over my shoulder, every time my phone buzzed, every time I questioned whether I was really moving on, they were there. But something had shifted in me after that conversation with Rachel. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. And anger has a way of sharpening focus. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail. Rachel. Her voice was calm, almost sweet, like we were old friends catching up. James, I just wanted to say, it's funny, isn't it? How easy it is to unravel someone's life with just a few words. You've always seemed so put together. I wonder how long that'll last. I stared at my phone, feeling the familiar heat rise in my chest. This wasn't about Mark anymore. This was about her. She wasn't just poking the wound, she wanted to tear it open, to prove that I wasn't as strong as I pretended to be. But if she wanted a reaction, she was going to get one. Just not the one she expected. I called Chris. I need everything you can find on Rachel, background, finances, family. All of it. You sure about this? He asked, his voice cautious. This feels like it's getting personal. It is personal. Chris didn't argue. Within a day, he had a dossier thicker than I anticipated. Rachel was unraveling. After her divorce from Mark, she'd spiraled, job losses, legal issues, debt piling up. She'd burned bridges with friends, alienated family. On the surface, she wore this mask of control, but underneath it, she was falling apart. And people like that? They don't just want to see you hurt. They want to see you broken because they are. But I wasn't going to break. I was going to end this. I showed up at her apartment unannounced. It wasn't hard to find, Chris had given me everything. When she opened the door, her smile was immediate, like she'd been expecting me. James, she purred, leaning against the doorframe. Did you miss me already? I didn't bother with small talk. You're done. The smile faltered just slightly. Done with what? This game. The notes. The stalking. The pathetic attempts to stay relevant in my life. Her eyes narrowed. You think you can control how this ends? I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. I'm not here to control it. I'm here to finish it. I pulled out the envelope I'd brought with me, photos, emails, records of her harassment, everything Chris had dug up. You've left a trail, Rachel. A messy one. I could ruin you with this. She snatched the envelope from my hand, flipping through it, her face paling with every page. Is this a threat? She hissed. No, I replied. It's a promise. I turned to leave, pausing at the door. You wanted to remind me that I'm not free? Let me remind you, I never needed to be. Because I was never the one trapped. Days passed without a word from Rachel. No calls. No notes. Just silence. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like peace. But peace is fragile. And ghosts never die quietly. It was late one night when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something made me answer. A voice I hadn't heard in months. Hey, James. It's Mark. My heart stopped. We need to talk. Mark's voice on the other end of the line felt like hearing a ghost speak, a voice I thought I'd buried alongside the wreckage of my marriage. We need to talk. I gripped the phone tighter, the familiar heat rising in my chest. "Why would I talk to you?" I shot back, my tone flat, masking the tension brewing beneath the surface. There was a pause, the faint sound of static buzzing between us before he spoke again. "Because it's about Rachel." For a moment, I didn't respond. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of everything that had happened: Rachel's stalking, her unraveling threats, and now Mark reaching out like we were teammates in some twisted game. "What about her?" I finally asked. Mark's voice dropped lower, tinged with something I didn't expect: fear. "She's gone off the rails, James. This isn't just about you anymore. She's dangerous." I laughed, bitter and hollow. "Yeah, I figured that out when she started stalking me." "No," he snapped, his voice sharper now. "You don't get it. She's been following me too. Calling my job. Showing up at my apartment. She's losing it." There was a tremor in his voice, and for the first time, I believed him. This wasn't just Rachel trying to haunt me. This was something darker. "Meet me," Mark said, his words quick, like he was afraid someone was listening. "We need to figure this out before it gets worse." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Because something told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We met at a rundown bar on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where no one asks questions, and everyone minds their own business. Mark was already there when I arrived, hunched over a glass of cheap whiskey, his eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. He looked different, thinner, more worn down, like life had kicked him in the teeth repeatedly since the last time I saw him. "Good." I pulled up a chair without saying a word, just stared at him until he finally spoke. "She's not right," he muttered, glancing around the dim room. "She's been watching me. Sending me letters. Showing up at places I go, just staring. Not saying anything. Just watching." "Sounds familiar," I replied coldly. Mark ran a hand through his messy hair, his fingers trembling slightly. "Look, I know I'm the last person you want to deal with, but this isn't just about our mess anymore. Rachel's crossed some kind of line." I stayed quiet, letting his words hang in the air. "She's obsessed," he continued. "Not just with me. Not just with you. With the whole thing, what happened between all of us." I leaned forward slightly, my voice low. "So, what do you want from me?" Mark looked up, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. "I want to stop her before she does something we can't fix." Reluctantly, I agreed to work with Mark, not because I trusted him, but because I didn't trust Rachel. Chris was skeptical when I told him. "You're teaming up with the guy who wrecked your life?" he asked, incredulous. "This isn't about him," I replied. "It's about ending this." Chris agreed to help, digging deeper into Rachel's recent activities. What he found made my skin crawl. Rachel had been spiraling faster than we realized. Restraining orders from former colleagues, harassment charges from neighbors, even police reports from strangers claiming she'd been following them. But the most disturbing part. She had photos of both me and Mark pinned up in her apartment, connected with strings like some kind of conspiracy theory. Dates. Times. Locations. She'd been tracking us both. Not out of love. Not even out of revenge. Out of obsession. We knew we couldn't go to the police, not yet. There was no solid proof she'd done anything illegal beyond harassment, and we needed more if we wanted this nightmare to end. So we set a trap. Mark agreed to meet Rachel, pretending he wanted to talk things over. We chose a public park, somewhere open, with plenty of witnesses. I stayed hidden nearby, phone in hand, ready to record everything. Rachel arrived, her appearance almost casual, jeans, a jacket, her hair pulled back. But her eyes, they were hollow. Mark played his part well, feigning regret, pretending to miss her. But Rachel wasn't buying it. She moved closer to him, her voice low but sharp. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" she hissed. "You think I don't see how you're both trying to get rid of me?" Mark tried to respond, but Rachel snapped. She lunged at him, pulling something from her jacket, a knife, small but sharp, glinting in the afternoon sun. I was out of my hiding spot in seconds, rushing toward them as Mark stumbled back, trying to fend her off. Chris wasn't far behind, tackling Rachel to the ground, disarming her before she could do any real damage. The police arrived minutes later. Rachel was arrested, screaming our names as they dragged her away. Her words still echo in my mind. "You think this is over? It's never over." Mark and I stood there in silence after the chaos settled. No words left. No apologies needed. Because there was nothing left to say. I walked away without looking back. But deep down, I knew Rachel was right about one thing. This would never truly be over. Because some scars don't fade. They just stop bleeding. Weeks passed after Rachel's arrest, but the echoes of that chaotic day lingered like the aftershocks of an earthquake. Life resumed its mechanical rhythm, but beneath the surface, everything had shifted. I thought that seeing her dragged away, hearing the finality in the slam of the police car door, would bring closure. But closure is a myth. Some stories don't end with a clean break. They bleed into the next chapter. I moved again, new apartment, new number, new routine. It wasn't about running anymore. It was about starting fresh without the weight of ghosts trailing behind me. Work consumed most of my days, filling the empty spaces where resentment used to live. I found comfort in the mundane, the hiss of morning coffee, the steady hum of city traffic outside my window, even the silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, silence wasn't suffocating. But peace is fragile. It never lasts. It came on an ordinary Tuesday. No dramatic knock on the door, no ominous phone call, just a plain envelope slid through the mail slot, nestled between bills and junk mail. No return address. No handwriting I recognized. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words typed in bold, black font. "You think you've escaped, but you're just standing still. You'll never outrun the past. You carry it with you." No signature. But I didn't need one. I knew exactly who it was from. Rachel. I contacted Chris immediately. "She's still in custody, right?" I asked, pacing the small confines of my apartment, the letter crumpled in my fist. "She was," Chris replied, his voice grim. "Until last week." My heart skipped. "What do you mean was?" "Bail hearing. Somehow she got out." Of course she did. Because some people don't just haunt you, they cling to you, like a shadow that refuses to be left behind. But this time, I wasn't going to react with fear. This time, I'd end it on my terms. Rachel wanted attention. She thrived on control, on knowing she could still manipulate the narrative. So, I gave her exactly what she wanted, a response. I posted a photo online. Just one. Me, standing at a familiar spot, a park bench where she and I had once crossed paths during the height of our mess. The caption was simple. "Moving forward." It wasn't for anyone but her. A breadcrumb. A bait. And she took it. It was late when I felt the shift, the subtle sense that I wasn't alone. My apartment was dark except for the faint glow of the city outside. I didn't hear a door creak, didn't see a shadow move. But I knew. I turned slowly, my heart steady, not racing like I expected. And there she was. Rachel. Standing in the doorway of my living room, her expression a mix of triumph and something close to madness. "I knew you couldn't resist," she whispered, stepping closer. I didn't flinch. "You're right," I replied softly. "I couldn't. I wanted to see what failure looks like." Her face twisted, the smugness faltering. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think any of this makes you stronger?" I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "No," I said quietly. "But it makes me free." Before she could respond, the door burst open, Chris and two officers rushing in, guns drawn, shouts filling the space. It had been a trap all along. My trap. She fought as they cuffed her, screaming my name, her voice filled with rage and desperation. But this time, I didn't feel anything. No fear. No anger. Just peace. Real peace. Months later, after the trial, after the headlines faded, I stood alone at that same park bench. No more letters. No more shadows. Just me. I traced the scar on my memory, the one Rachel, Lauren, and Mark had left. It wasn't gone. It never would be. But it didn't hurt anymore. Because scars aren't signs of weakness. They're proof you survived. The end.